The morning started like something out of a fever dream. At exactly 6:02 a.m. on a Tuesday, 23 confused HOA board members stood in the cul-de-sac, clutching eviction notices while still wearing their fuzzy robes and Crocs. They all stared at the private property no trespassing signs that had somehow sprouted overnight like mushrooms after rain. Behind them, bulldozers sat idling with their engines rumbling ominously. And there I was, sipping my coffee on my porch beneath a banner. I'd had custom made that read, "Welcome to Gavinland, HOA free since Tuesday." My name is Gavin Rohr, and I wasn't always the type to wage war against an entire homeowners association. I'm an architect by trade, spend my evenings listening to jazz, and generally keep to myself. When I moved to Orchard Pines Estates 5 years ago, it wasn't for the gated community atmosphere or the weekly gazebo fundraisers that seemed more about gossip than charity. I bought my home for the land itself. 5 beautiful acres on a quiet hilltop at the very edge of the subdivision with enough privacy to build my koi pond without anyone bothering me. I even named each fish after jazz legends. Miles Davis was my favorite, a black and gold beauty that would eat straight from my hand. Life was peaceful until Karen entered the picture. She became HOA president 3 years ago through what I can only describe as a hostile takeover. Former mortgage broker turned full-time neighborhood tyrant. She ruled Orchard Pines with an iron fist wrapped in Lululemon. This woman once fined a 78-year-old widow $500 for what she called suspiciously colored bird feeders. When asked to define suspicious, Karen said with complete seriousness that Cardinal Red was clearly trying too hard. She described herself at meetings as constitutionally incompatible with tolerance, which should have been everyone's first red flag. But somehow she decided that I, the guy who just wanted to feed his fish in peace, was a threat to aesthetic cohesion. The harassment started small, almost laughably so. I received my first violation letter on a Monday morning. It stated that my pond reflected light at an HOA disruptive angle and demanded I paint the water a less reflective shade. I actually laughed out loud reading it. Paint water. The woman wanted me to paint water. When I ignored that letter, the violations began stacking up like a twisted game of bureaucratic Jenga. I was cited for unregistered outdoor sculptures, which turned out to be my collection of garden gnomes. Then came a complaint about wind-cham aggression, whatever that meant. My personal favorite was the violation for grass that seemed too natural, as if my lawn was somehow plotting against the neighborhood's Bermuda grass monopoly. Karen escalated. Her tactics when letters didn't work. HOA-funded drones started buzzing over my property at all hours, their cameras pointed down at my yard. I caught Ron Peterson, the HOA treasurer, literally crawling under my deck with a tape measure one evening. When I asked what he was doing, he mumbled something about unauthorized deck dimensions and skewered away like a startled raccoon. The situation reached peak absurdity when I installed solar panels on my roof. Karen called an emergency meeting and summoned what she actually called a shade tribunal to determine if my panels cast shadows that violated community standards. When the shade tribunal failed to find any violations, because shadows are just shadows after all, Karen claimed my land was encroaching on historic HOA soil. She brought in a surveyor who looked about as legitimate as a 3-bill, and he produced documents suggesting my property lines were wrong. That's when the nuclear option arrived in my mailbox. A $1 million fine for what the letter called compound violations, accumulated over time with interest. The letter threatened property seizure if I didn't pay within 30 days. $1 million for garden gnomes and natural-looking grass. Most people would have panicked, but I've always been a details person. Architecture teaches you to read every document, check every measurement, verify every claim. So I did what Karen apparently never bothered to do. I read my land deed, not just the first few pages, but all of it, including pages 19 through 34 that contain the original plats from 1912. That's when I discovered something absolutely beautiful. My property predated the entire subdivision by 60 years. I didn't actually live in the HOA. According to the original surveys and a decades-old zoning oversight that everyone had ignored, the HOA had actually expanded onto my land without proper authorization. I hired Patricia Hang, the best property attorney in the state, and brought in Lyle Morrison, a retired cartographer from the county assessor's office who had a passion for historical land disputes. Together, we launched a quiet title action that would change everything. The research Lyle conducted was magnificent. He found documents going back to when my land was part of the old Riverside Ranch, maps showing the true boundaries, and most importantly, proof that 2.7 acres of what was now called Orchard Pines Estates actually belonged to me. This included the community pool, the clubhouse, and here's the beautiful irony, Karen Destry's own house. The court case was swift and decisive. The judge, clearly amused by the entire situation, ruled completely in my favor. Not only was the $1 million fine dismissed as legally baseless, but I was confirmed as the rightful owner of a significant portion of what the HOA thought was theirs. The look on Karen's face when the verdict was read was priceless. Her mouth opened and closed like one of my coish, but no sound came out. For the first time in 3 years, Karen Destry was speechless. The eviction notices went out the next morning. Every single HOA board member who lived on my newly confirmed property received one. Karen, now technically my tenant since her house, sat squarely on my land, was given 30 days to vacate unless she agreed to pay market rent of $4,200 per month, plus additional fees I itemized as emotional damages for bird feeder trauma. I installed a new gate between my property and what remained of the subdivision. My gate with my rules, which mainly consisted of, leave me and my fish alone. The HOA members tried everything to change my mind. They screamed at town hall meetings, claiming I was destroying their community. They wept genuine tears over the loss of their clubhouse. Harold Jameson's wife even showed up at my door with a tray of homemade scones, begging me to reconsider. I smiled politely, accepted the scones because they were actually quite good, and continued filing the paperwork to officially rename my expanded parcel Gavin Land. The county approved it within a week, probably because they found the whole situation as entertaining as I did. Karen went into what I can only describe as full scorched earth mode. She tried claiming eminent domain, apparently not understanding that she wasn't the government. She called every local news station, spinning tales of a cruel man stealing homes from innocent families. She even attempted to set up a rival HOA for the remaining houses, which failed when nobody wanted her as president again. Her final desperate act was calling the county to complain that I was operating an unlicensed amusement park on my property. She claimed the koi pond was actually an illegal aquatic attraction. The county inspector who came out was a young guy named Derek who took one look at my pond, read through my deed documentation, and actually started laughing. He told me this was the most ridiculous complaint he'd ever investigated, and he once had to respond to a report about aggressive garden flamingos. Before leaving, Derek suggested that if I ever did want to open an amusement park, he'd be my first customer. That comment gave me an absolutely brilliant idea. The next week, I did exactly what Karen had accused me of. I opened Gavin Land to the public, completely legally and with all proper permits. I offered koi pond tours where visitors could feed Miles Davis and the gang. I converted part of the former clubhouse into a jazz cafe called The Disruptive Reflection, serving coffee and pastries while Charlie Parker played overhead. The piece to resistance was the Karen exhibit featuring animatronic readings of her most ridiculous HOA letters, including the infamous water painting demand. The exhibit became so popular that people drove from 3 counties away just to see it. The legal consequences for Karen started rolling in like a symphony reaching its crescendo. First, she was sued by 16 homeowners for misuse of HOA funds, after it was discovered she'd spent $40,000 on those surveillance drones. The forensic accountant found she'd also been embezzling money meant for landscaping to fund her personal legal battles. She was hit with criminal charges for fraud and faced up to 5 years in prison. The judge sentenced her to 3 years with possibility of parole after 18 months, plus $200,000 in restitution. When the sentence was read, Karen's face went from red to white to a shade of purple I didn't know humans could achieve. She screamed that this was a conspiracy, that I had orchestrated everything before being escorted out in handcuffs, still shouting about the unconstitutional nature of property.